My name's Daniel Lopez. My number is 222-6341. I was convicted of murder. Being with this case is gruesome, and it's not the norm. I think we could all be dangerous people. You know what I mean? Every human being on this earth can be dangerous if they're pushed to that point in their life. I know people want to know, was I in the right state of mind? What was I thinking? What was I feeling? Was I sober? Was I on drugs? I know people want to know all this, but this case is not what I want to be remembered as. This case is just another chapter in my life. I think we could all be dangerous people.
People say you're a monster.
I'm not sitting here saying I'm innocent.
I just murdered some guy in cold blood.
When you have a case like this, it's just terrible. The facts are terrible. It's everything you wouldn't want to see on a case. It's gory, it's gruesome. The evidence, was stacked against Daniel. But I get called in often for people that other lawyers don't want. And that's what happened in Daniel's case. My name's Charles Bunk. I'm a criminal defense attorney here in San Antonio, Texas. Daniel, he's scary. He's visibly imposing. And he does present himself, or he wants to present himself as this mean, evil person. But I absolutely think Candy Dominguez was in charge of this whole thing. The whole thing started with Candy being manipulative. They're both, in my opinion, equally culpable. How would I describe their relationship? Demented. This is a letter from Candy to Daniel Lopez. If you look at the envelope, Mrs. Candy Lopez to Mr. Daniel Lopez, and then, it's full of love. I love you, I love you, I love you. I loved you from the minute I saw you. You read these and you think they've got this really strong, loving relationship, but I know what they did and I know what they're capable of doing. And then on the back, she uses her go-to phrase, ride or die, and then fuck Bonnie and Clyde, wife and husband. It's almost as if she's saying, Bonnie and Clyde got nothing on us. You read these things and you would think that his loving wife was going to come say he didn't do it. And yet, when she testified, there was no love at all between Candy and Daniel. She came and she said, that guy right there is the guy that did all this stuff. I think he thought this loving wife was going to come, and that's not who showed up. Candy showed up.
I feel like we clicked at first, but then once I got locked up and she got locked up, I started seeing a different side of her. I was like, this is not the Candy I know, but she's just playing her part. She's just playing the system. You didn't see me smiling when I was on trial. She put on this little show, made it seem like she was crazy. She made it seem like a circus. I was raised up in San Antonio, Texas, on the west side of town. The kind of sketchy neighborhood, harsh, hard upbringing. Even as a child, I kind of walked into school seeing prostitutes and a lot of drug dealing going on. They respected me and showed me unconditional love. But once you're involved and you're part of something, now you're in the inside, dealing with life, death, extortion, drugs, prostitution, money, uh, everything that you could think of that a lot of people see in these movies. I guess you could say I kind of got involved in lifestyle young. But I was just like, I was already used to females just wanting to mess with me because of the lifestyle I was living. I met Candy through my cousin. I went over there one time and I delivered some drugs, and she was there. We started hanging out. I stayed at her house one time, and then, we got involved with each other, but we just knew each other from a short amount of time, and then all this happened. Well, I guess they would say he injured me, but to me, I was just like, to me, it was nothing major.
So whose idea was it to bring Jose to the house?
Jose to the house? Well, see, I really don't want to talk about it. Like, there was a lot of assumptions on the case, and to this day, people are assuming a lot. They're accusing me of killing Jose, right? But everybody who got to understand, my lord, did you see this man kill this? No, I seen him have a physical altercation, but at the end of the day, he was still breathing when I left. Nobody in this world seen me kill this man. Nobody in this world seen me or witnessed me kill this man. How am I being charged with murder?
So you didn't kill him?
See, a lot happened that night. And I won't talk about who didn't kill him, or if he did kill him, or if I did kill him, or Gabriel killed him, or Candy killed him. Only God knows what happened that night. And then when I was on trial, they started bringing up other stuff, other murders, and I honestly gotta say, it was a lot for me.
In the sentencing phase, they brought up another murder of Dominique Hernandez.
Of course.
Did you kill Dominique?
No.
Have you ever killed anyone?
Of course.
You've never been prosecuted for any of the murders you did do?
No. No, I haven't.
The evidence was overwhelming. So Daniel and I were behind the 8 ball from the get-go. All the witnesses that were at the house all said Daniel was there. And some of the surrounding witnesses, if you will, they said that Daniel said that out loud. I told you I was going to get him, and I got him. So the defense was not so much, hey, I have an alibi, or hey, somebody else did it. Our defense tried to kind of shift some of the blame away from Daniel to just get the light off of him and try to, hey, look over there. There's something really good happening over there. Go look at that. Don't look at him. And I think that there was at least hope that maybe Candy wasn't going to come say anything against her boyfriend. But when she got up there, she wanted him to know, you know what? I got a deal and you didn't. She was almost proud to be sitting up there, able to tell her story and throw him under the bus. And she did it well. I don't have an issue with Candy getting a deal. I think they needed Candy's testimony, but I would have liked to have seen her get more time. Even if she serves her whole time, she will get out after 30 years. But she was every bit as complicit in this thing as Daniel was. She set the whole thing up. I mean, it's only fair if both sides get a fair shot. And as you get to know Daniel, you're not that surprised that Daniel did what he did. But you see Candy and you think, well, okay, can she really be that evil? And apparently she can. By the time she testified, I'd read enough of her letters to realize she's just as dangerous as he is. Sylvia's testimony was terrible, and it was a bad situation. Pee-wee and Daniel had a beef. I get that. Sylvia had no dog in this fight whatsoever. But they keep Sylvia in the bathroom for days, and they kept her basically hostage. Sylvia testified that she's in the bathroom of the house and she could hear the beating as it happened. She described the sound she heard like the pinging of the aluminum bats. That was a hard thing to sit through and listen to.
We are a close family. Sylvia was the oldest of 6 children. She was a very good big sister. Then she was a good mommy too. Now we don't see that spark in her anymore. It's just sadness, like she's just hollow. She's alive, but she's not living. My name is Andriana, and I'm Sylvia's mother. Jose was a funny guy. He wasn't a perfect person, but he was good to Sylvia. He gave his life that she would be safe. He died telling her that he loved her. There was nothing that she could do. The first time I saw her after this happened, she crawled in the bed with me and got in kind of the fetal position. And she started to tell me what happened. Sylvia and Jose walked through the door. Daniel started hitting Jose with the bat. He just beat the life out of him. He was yelling out for Candy. He was yelling for his cousin. And Sylvia told him, "Why are you yelling for her? She put us in this situation." They ended up tying Sylvia up and put her in the shower in Candy's restroom. And they basically held her hostage for days. She was hogtied. So she had the marking on her ankles and her wrists. She still has scars from it. Later on, Daniel took Sylvia out to the barbecue pit. And Jose's leg was on the barbecue pit. It was burned. Daniel told her, you know what I did to him, and you're a lot smaller. So I believe Daniel is a very dangerous person. But Candy was worse. Candy said that she didn't regret anything. She was bragging about what she did to her own cousin. Candy was just cold. Sylvia said she asked her one time to loosen up the ropes, and she cursed at her and told her that she wasn't going anywhere. And it's about 3 days after Jose's body was found that Sylvia finally escaped.
Will you guys have a napkin or tissue?
Yeah, I'll get you some.
Like, then people, they're crazy. Like,
Okay, they're also in jail right now. Okay, but if there's, well, I know if there's other people who need to be put in jail, then I need to hear it from you.
yeah, but there's just they're in jail doesn't mean that me or my family safe.
Okay, well, why don't you explain to me what you know about his death?
I was there,
Okay, well, yeah, walk me through it.
He beat my dude to death in front of me. The only other person that might say something, which I doubt, because right now she's sacrificing her own life.
Who?
I mean, Candy. She, got her own cousin killed. It's just psychotic. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's just really crazy.
Nana, ito.
Before this, Candy was my favorite niece. And there wasn't anything she would ever hide from me. Those were the days that I loved her. That was the Candy that I knew. My name is Yvonne Gilkey, and Jose Chaka Jr. was my son. It was my only son. And we were very close. Jose, Pee-wee. He was always goofy. Since he was little, he was a goofy kid. You know, and he was always happy-go-lucky, you know. Always put a smile on someone's face. And I could never be upset with him too long because he would always make me laugh, no matter what. Pee-wee and Candy, they were first cousins. They were inseparable. They would always watch out for each other. So yeah, I always thought he was safe with Candy. And that was my biggest mistake ever, trusting her. I had been calling my niece Candy, calling her because that's, if I couldn't get a hold of him, I'd get a hold of her. So she'd tell him to call me. But she never answered my calls or anything. And that's when we got the phone call. And that was the worst day of my life. Her mother's the one that told me. She said, are you sitting down? I go, no, why? What's going on? She goes, please sit down. She said, my son, Jose, Pee-wee, had been murdered by her daughter, Candy, and her daughter's boyfriend. I would have never imagined it, that she'd have done something like that. This doesn't make no sense to me. Why does she have to go through that extreme? Why does she do it? I was very shocked. She was sarcastic, happy, what she had done. She was proud of what she had did. She sat in court and just laughed. I just seen evil in her. I seen evil in her that I had not ever seen before. And I'm glad that guy, punk-ass motherfucker, got life. Candy should have got life, too. She planned it. She planned when she was gonna go pick my son up. She planned what they were gonna do. She was the mastermind behind all this. I felt so bad for these kids because of the actions that she took that day. Her kids are now suffering. I would not ever put my kids to see somebody else get killed. Ever would I do that.
Initially, the impression I had of Candy Dominguez was a mother who was maybe, unwillingly involved, trying to protect her children. But at the end of the day, the children are unspoken victims in this case because they have to live with the trauma of what they know took place. When this brutal murder took place, there were 3 children in the household. They were all kindergarten age, very young. And we found through the investigation that Candy put all the children into that back bedroom. She turned the TV on and she told them not to leave. She did that because she knew what was going to happen. She knew what the plan was. The shocking thing was that this is her own family. And they're all kind of forced to be unwilling participants in this brutal murder.
All right, can you sit down in that chair for me? Oh, it's a weird room. It's got carpet on the walls and stuff. But it's a good one. Okay, so we can have privacy and talk. Okay. My name is Detective Size. This is where I work. Okay. What is your name?
Brianna.
Brianna? And what is your mom's name?
Candy Dominguez.
All right. What we're wanting to talk to you about is something that might have happened there recently. You know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
Kind of. Do you know Pee-wee?
Yes.
Something happened with Pee-wee at your house?
I'm not sure.
Not sure.
I remember watching this video, and the biggest thing that stuck out was just how calm she explained what she saw and heard that day.
We were watching TV in the front room, me and my brother. And then we were watching Netflix, and they told us to go in my room. They said they were moving stuff, Yeah, but I don't think they were because they were in my mom's room. And there was people screaming, help me. And then the other day, then the next day, well, we went in my mom's room and we saw blood kind of on the couch and there was 2 holes in the wall. My mom's boyfriend came in, but when he came in, he had a white shirt, white pants on, and he looked like they had blood on him.
Brianna knows what took place.
I mean, she's very descriptive about it. But at the same time, she doesn't seem very emotional about it. She just kind of openly talks about it as if she's describing going to school one day.
So you said that night when you heard screaming, somebody screaming for help. Was it a man or a woman that was screaming
It
for
was
help?
a man.
Man?
And
Did you recognize the voice?
No. Kind of sounded like Pee-wee, but I'm not sure.
She knew who these people were. She could recognize voices. And it was heartbreaking because this is not what a child should have to be dealing with when they're at home. And for her to be able to explain this, it's very sad.
Okay, so this man, when he was screaming, what was he saying?
He was saying, Candy, help me. He was screaming for help.
So he was screaming for your mom to help.
And help too. He just had my mom think 2 times.
For me, the biggest heartbreak when I watched it was how much exposure does a child like this and her siblings have to violence in the household? Are they so used to this kind of violence that to them it's just another day where somebody's getting brutally murdered in this house? And so I still had a lot of questions. And the only way I can get an answer to these questions, I need to talk to Candy Dominguez. This woman walks in, very petite, very respectful. And she sat at the foot of the table, I sat on one side, and I began the interview. And I asked her, were you involved with this because you were forced to be involved, you were coerced into being involved with this? And she came right out and said no. And she immediately goes into this story that I did not expect. And I was absolutely shocked by it.
Well, after everybody left, the body just sat there for like a week. So then I told Daniel, something has to give. We have to do something because the body smells. You can smell it 3 blocks away from my house. You can smell the body. And he's like, I can't. I said, yes, you can. So we go to cut the body up into pieces because we're going to burn this body in the barbecue pit. That was the original plan. So he's looking there and he's standing there looking like, and I'm like, well, what are you waiting for? You know? And he's just standing there. So I go get some things and I cut up the body myself. I come back into the back house and I start cutting up the body. And I told him, well, do something at least, you know? This is your stuff. Like, pick up the pieces, do something. So he's laughing at me and he's like, I'm in love. And he picks up the pieces of the body and he's putting it in bags.
When I listen to this audio today, I can see that same attitude, that same person is still there. I was expecting a lot of tears, a lot of crying, a lot of fear and intimidation. Instead, I got this person who had absolutely no emotion, who had absolutely no remorse, who was at the verge of bragging about what occurred to her own cousin. There was clearly something there that made her want to say, look, this is who I am. This is what I did. Quite frankly, she scared me. I mean, she sat there and calmly talked about how she dismembered a human body and was almost proud to say that this is not the first time she has done this. Candy Dominguez is part of the Mexican mafia lifestyle. In her interview, She went as far as to explain that she disposes of body parts for cartels in Mexico. And this is not a lifestyle that is easily rehabilitated from. She still has no emotion. She still has no remorse for what occurred in her home to her cousin in an area that was in close proximity to her children. So Candy Dominguez, 100%, is still a dangerous individual.
Still his life. But, this was never nothing personal. I didn't expect everything to happen the way it did. It was not planned. It just happened. I've always been cold. I'm not emotional, and that's not because I'm trying. It's just over the years as a kid, I turned my emotions off and I never turned them back on. Even as a kid, I was not emotional. I didn't cry. I never have. It was a way of surviving because the streets don't love nobody. They don't take care of nobody. I became emotionally cut off. I was numb most of the time. Like, I was just living. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't feeling. I was about 8 years old, and I had run away from home, and I was staying at a house. And the girl's house I was staying at, her family was in the cartel. And that's how I became involved. And as I got older, it was a choice to stay around them. The most gruesome thing I saw involving the cartel was when they skinned a man alive. Yes. And then they beheaded him and hung him from the highway. As far as disposing of bodies, you don't gotta learn, you just watch. If you're just quiet, you can watch a lot of things. But when I had my kids, I knew for sure that was a lifestyle I didn't want to be a part of. And that lifestyle I walked away from when I was a teenager. But when I met Daniel, it just took right back to it,
My impression of the relationship between Daniel and Candy was one of control. She was a perfect victim for him.
She wanted somebody that was a bad boy, and she found him, and it was obvious to me that he just totally took over her. She's somebody that you need to be afraid of.
I did believe he was going to kill me. Because, I had already heard that he killed his ex-girlfriend, and I had already heard a lot of stuff. So I was like, his threats clearly are not empty if his girlfriend before me was dead, But when he said he was going to kill me that first time, I said, okay, fine. So then he's like, you're not going to run or cry? I'm really going to kill you. You didn't hear me? But I looked at Daniel, and I laughed in his face. And then he did a double take, and he called me a crazy bitch. And he didn't kill me. So I was like, whatever, So, no, I didn't try to stop Daniel. Could I have? I probably could have, because I had a good influence over him. But either way, I can't blame Daniel for being in the situation I'm in, because I made a choice to be there with him, to help him. And I'm sorry I'm not very emotional about it. I'm not going to put crocodile tears on to appease anybody,
Were you afraid of him?
I was not afraid of him. Most definitely, I was not. He's hot-tempered. He's hot-headed. But he's a very caring person. He's got a loving heart. I never expected to have what I had with Daniel. What I had with him, I never felt with nobody. And no matter what we did, that connection with him is still there, you know? Daniel was my first love. My first and my last. Maybe my last.
When was the last time you wrote to Daniel?
Well, we're not supposed to have any contact with each other, actually. But let's see, the last time I wrote to Daniel was about, what are we in March? About 8 months ago. But I don't even know if he ever got it or not. So, but I'm pretty sure he did.
A relationship with Candy is just, people could think what they want, you know what I'm saying? I just knew Candy for a little short amount of time, so I didn't really get to know her. And I didn't really see her like a serious relationship. But yeah, she used to write me all the time. She still tries to reach out, like, yeah, she sent me a JPEG through somebody, I think her daughter or somebody else. And she put, I love you and Candy or whatever. But I just laugh and throw that shit away. I don't got nothing for her, you know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, I got fucked over or whatever, how you want to say it. That's how I see it. But I don't see her laughing because she got 30 years. For me personally, I take responsibility for the lifestyle I chose, not for this murder, but the lifestyle I chose. If you're not living that lifestyle, you wouldn't be put in that situation, right? Because everybody wants to be like, oh, they want that clout, you want fortune, fame, everybody wants a badass drug dealer-ass boyfriend to take care of them. But at the end of the day, everything comes with a price, you know what I'm saying? Everything comes with a price.
I killed my wife, but I'm not going to harm anyone. I've changed.
Why should people trust you?
They have to see. That's the next chapter.
You know, so many people have lost their lives just out of this one case alone.
How did this guy get out to do it again?
He thought I betrayed him, and we went at it, and he died.
I had a metal baseball bat. When he dropped, I started kicking him.
This was a brutal, brutal beating.
Anybody injured? Yeah, there's a guy laying on the street.
His friend's eyes get big, like, fuck all that. I knock him out too.
I'm not sitting here saying I'm innocent. I'm not. But to die like this is beyond me, though.
It's so horrific to even visualize blood all over them. You're gonna have to stop.
It's hard for me to feel this sense of guilt because I feel justified.
At 2:13 in the morning, a truck driver crossing a deserted stretch of Highway 41 saw something standing near the shoulder beneath the glow of a dying gas station sign. And for the rest of his life, he would swear the child looked less like someone abandoned and more like someone who had escaped from somewhere terrible. She wasn't crying. That was the first detail investigators wrote down later because children alone in the dark usually screamed. Panicked, ran toward headlights, begged for help. But this little girl stood perfectly still in the freezing wind, wearing a yellow raincoat, several sizes too big for her tiny body. Mud covering her bare legs, dark hair hanging wet across her face. One hand clutching a broken plastic doll with no eyes. The truck driver slowed because he thought at first she might be dead. Then the child slowly lifted her head and stared directly into his windshield. He would later tell police her expression frightened him more than anything he had ever seen on the road. Not fear, not confusion, just exhaustion. Deep, empty exhaustion in the eyes of a child who looked no older than 6 years old. He pulled into the gas station immediately and called emergency services from payphone while keeping the girl in sight through the glass. She never moved, never blinked, never took her eyes off the highway. By the time deputies arrived 20 minutes later, rain had begun hammering the asphalt hard enough to flood the roadside ditches. But the child still stood exactly where the driver first saw her, silent beneath flickering neon lights while 18-wheelers roared past in the darkness behind her. Deputy Harold Mendez approached slowly, speaking softly, asking her name, asking where her parents were, asking if she was hurt. Nothing. The little girl stared at him without emotion. Mendez noticed bruises around both wrists immediately. Faint purple marks. Recent. He knelt carefully beneath the rain and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. The child finally reacted when he touched the plastic doll. She pulled it back violently and whispered something so quietly Mendez barely heard it above the storm. Don't let him see me. Then she stopped speaking again completely. Investigators would spend the next 30 years trying to understand who him was. That single sentence became one of the most famous unanswered questions in modern criminal history. Because within hours, the unidentified child found beside Highway 41 became the center of a national mystery that consumed investigators. Reporters, profilers, psychics, and entire communities across the country. News stations called her the Highway Girl first. Then another headline appeared 3 days later after authorities admitted they could not identify her through fingerprints, missing persons reports, school records, or hospital databases. Who was America's most mysterious child? The name stuck permanently. Detectives moved the girl into emergency protective custody immediately after doctors confirmed she suffered from severe dehydration, malnutrition, and signs of prolonged physical abuse. Yet despite the obvious trauma, medical staff noticed something unusual almost immediately. The child was extremely disciplined emotionally. Too disciplined. Nurses describe her movements as cautious and controlled, like someone trained never to make noise. She folded blankets precisely, ate slowly while watching doors and windows constantly, flinched whenever male voices echoed down hospital corridors. But the strangest detail emerged during psychiatric evaluations. The child refused to say her own name, not because she wouldn't cooperate, because she genuinely seemed terrified of it. Whenever therapists asked who she was, she became visibly distressed, rocking silently while gripping the eyeless doll against her chest. Then one night, during a thunderstorm striking the city outside the hospital, a nurse overheard the girl whispering repeatedly into the darkness beside her bed. "If he hears my name, he'll come back." The statement triggered immediate alarm among investigators already fearing the child escaped from a violent abduction or trafficking situation. Yet despite nationwide media coverage, nobody came forward to claim her. No desperate parents, no relatives, no missing child report matching her description. It was as though she appeared from nowhere. The public became obsessed instantly. Reporters flooded the hospital parking lot. Sketch artists recreated her face for newspapers nationwide. Hotline tips exploded into the thousands. Every missing girl from the previous decade suddenly became a possible match. Detectives chased leads through 13 states, while forensic specialists analyzed the child's clothing, hair, dental records, even the dirt trapped beneath her fingernails. Nothing identified her. The yellow raincoat came from a discontinued department store line sold across multiple states years earlier. The doll contained no fingerprints except the child's own. Even her accent confused experts. Some believed Midwestern, others Southern. The mystery deepened daily. Then came the first truly terrifying discovery. During examination of the raincoat under ultraviolet light, forensic technicians found faint brown stains hidden beneath layers of mud near the cuffs and collar. Blood, old blood. DNA testing in the early 90s remained primitive compared to modern standards. But investigators confirmed quickly the blood belonged to multiple individuals. At least one sample matched the child herself. Another belonged to an unidentified adult male. A third sample could not be fully processed because of degradation. Suddenly, the case transformed overnight from abandoned child investigation into possible homicide. Inquiry. Newspapers exploded with speculation. Did the highway girl escape a killer? Fear spread across nearby towns immediately. Parents refused letting children walk alone. Rumors circulated about hidden predators targeting rural highways for years unnoticed. Then investigators uncovered another detail that pushed the case toward national hysteria. The bruises around the child's wrists matched restraint patterns consistent with rope binding. Not accidental injury, intentional confinement. FBI profilers entered the case within days. They interviewed the child repeatedly alongside trauma specialists, hoping to uncover fragments of memory without re-traumatizing her further. Sometimes she remained silent for hours. Other times she spoke suddenly in strange, disconnected phrases that disturbed everyone listening. The room smelled like rain. He buried the shoes. The woman wouldn't stop singing. Investigators filled notebooks with cryptic statements while trying desperately to separate imagination from trauma memory. Then the girl drew a picture during therapy that changed the atmosphere surrounding the case. Permanently. Using black crayons only, she sketched a narrow cabin surrounded by trees beneath heavy rain clouds. Beside the cabin stood 3 figures holding hands. 2 adults, 1 child. But the adults had no faces, just empty circles scratched violently into the paper. Above the drawing, she wrote 2 words in shaky letters. Still inside. Detectives reportedly felt genuine fear looking at the image because nobody had mentioned cabins, forests, or additional victims to the child beforehand. It's something about the drawing felt disturbingly specific. Search teams began sweeping wooded areas surrounding Highway 41 immediately while helicopters scanned abandoned structures within a 100-mile radius. Nothing surfaced. Meanwhile, the child herself became increasingly withdrawn beneath growing media obsession. Cameras followed every transfer between facilities. Strangers mailed dolls, clothing, handwritten letters begging authorities to find her family. One woman traveled from Ohio, insisting the girl was her granddaughter kidnapped years earlier. DNA disproved the claim within days. Another man confessed falsely to murdering the child's parents before psychiatric evaluations. Exposed severe mental illness. The case attracted chaos constantly. But behind closed doors, detectives focused on one chilling possibility above all others. What if nobody was searching for her because everyone connected to her disappearance was already dead? Then came the break that nearly solved the mystery before it collapsed into even deeper darkness. 3 weeks after the child appeared on Highway 41, a state trooper discovered an abandoned van submerged partially in swamp water 80 miles north of the gas station. The vehicle had been wiped clean mostly, but forensic teams recovered traces of blood inside, matching the unidentified male sample found on the raincoat. They also discovered children's clothing, rope fibers, and a cassette tape damaged heavily by water exposure. Detectives believed instantly they had located the vehicle connected to the child's captivity. But when divers searched surrounding marshland expecting bodies, they found nothing except one horrifying detail. Buried beneath mud, near the van, lay a shallow grave containing bones from at least 2 unidentified adults. Both victims suffered blunt force trauma to the skull. Neither matched missing persons databases. The nation exploded again. Now investigators faced not merely an unidentified child, but potential serial murders tied to her. Unknown past. News anchors began referring to the little girl differently after that discovery. No longer the highway girl. She became the ghost child. Because the deeper detectives dug into her origins, the more it seemed every answer led only toward dead ends and buried bodies. Yet amid the frenzy, one detective on the task force noticed something others overlooked repeatedly. Every time investigators mentioned the swamp van near the child, she reacted not with fear, but anger. Pure cold anger. Finally, Detective Laura Bennett decided to test a theory during a supervised interview. She placed photographs of the recovered van silently on the table beside the girl without asking questions. The child stared at the images for nearly a minute before pointing suddenly toward the passenger side door. That's where he watched. Bennett asked carefully who watched. The little girl answered instantly this time. The man with no eyes. Then she began screaming uncontrollably for the first time since being found beside Highway 41. Nurses rushed into the room while the child curled beneath the table, crying so violently she could barely breathe. But through the panic, she kept repeating one sentence over and over until even hardened. Investigators listening outside the observation glass reportedly felt chills crawl through their bodies. He said nobody would ever know my real name. The screaming lasted nearly 12 minutes before sedatives finally calmed the child enough for doctors to move her back into protective isolation. And afterward, even veteran investigators admitted something inside the interview room felt profoundly wrong. Detective Laura Bennett replayed the recording repeatedly through the night, searching for anything hidden beneath the panic. But every sentence only deepened the mystery. The man with no eyes. That's where he watched. Nobody would ever know my real name. The phrases sounded less like imagination and more like fragments torn from memories too terrifying for a 6-year-old mind to process completely. Yet despite the emotional collapse, the interview accomplished something important for the first time since the girl appeared beside Highway 41. It proved she recognized the swamp, then immediately she had been inside it, which meant somewhere beyond the dead adults buried in the marshland existed another figure still unidentified, a man connected directly to her captivity, a man she feared enough to avoid speaking her own name aloud. Federal profilers intensified their involvement immediately. Behavioral analysts studying child trauma noticed the girl displayed patterns common among victims, raised in prolonged, coercive environments. Hypervigilance, emotional suppression, dissociation during questioning. But one psychiatrist made an observation that disturbed investigators deeply. The child did not behave like someone recently abducted. She behaved like someone raised in fear for so long that terror had become routine. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued excavating the swamp burial site, hoping additional evidence might identify the dead adults. The remains belonged to a man and woman estimated between 30 and 40 years old. Both suffered repeated skull fractures inflicted by a blunt metal object. Time of death, roughly within 2 months before discovery. Yet neither victim matched fingerprints, dental records, or national missing persons databases. Detectives suspected fake identities or undocumented backgrounds. Then another detail surfaced. The woman's rib cage showed signs of healed fractures months older than the fatal injuries. Long-term abuse. And beneath her fingernails, investigators recovered fibers matching the child's yellow raincoat. The unidentified woman knew the little girl personally, possibly tried protecting her. Suddenly, the case shifted emotionally for investigators. The child may not have escaped alone. Someone may have died trying to help her flee. News leaks about the swamp bodies pushed public fear toward obsession. Parents flooded police stations demanding updates. Hotline operators received thousands of calls daily claiming sightings of suspicious vans. Faceless men abandoned cabins. Talk shows debated whether the ghost child escaped a cult, trafficking network, or serial killer operating across state lines. Some tabloids printed absurd theories about satanic groups hiding children in forests. Others accused law enforcement of concealing linked disappearances stretching back decades. Through it all, the child remained hidden inside a secure pediatric psychiatric facility under constant protection, while authorities struggled desperately to uncover her identity before whoever hunted her returned. Because investigators increasingly believed someone was still searching for the girl. The first sign appeared 5 days after the interview collapse. A nurse discovered muddy footprints outside the child hospital window shortly before dawn despite heavy rain washing the grounds overnight. Security cameras malfunctioned during the same 40-minute window. No intruder captured. Yet one camera near the parking garage briefly recorded a dark figure standing motionless beneath a street lamp staring toward the hospital before disappearing into darkness seconds later. The footage was grainy and useless, but the figure appeared unusually tall and wore what looked like a long black raincoat. Authorities locked down the entire hospital immediately. Federal marshals joined security details. Detectives searched surrounding neighborhoods for witnesses, but found nothing except one unsettling statement from an elderly janitor working nearby construction sites overnight. He claimed he saw a man standing beside the hospital fence around 3:00 a.m. smoking cigarettes in the rain without moving for nearly an hour. Looked like he was waiting for something, the janitor told police quietly. Then he added another detail investigators never forgot. I couldn't see his eyes. Fear inside the task force escalated instantly. Someone knew where the child was being held. Meanwhile, the girl herself deteriorated psychologically beneath growing stress. She stopped sleeping almost entirely, refused eating unless female nurses remained beside her, drew increasingly disturbing pictures during therapy sessions, faceless adults standing in forests, children buried beneath rainwater, cabins with boarded windows and chains hanging from ceilings. Yet one drawing caught Detective Bennett's attention more than all the others. The child sketched a map, crude but deliberate. A winding road leading toward a lake surrounded by pine trees. Beside the water stood a small church marked with a red X. Bennett showed the drawing quietly, too. Regional investigators familiar with Highway 41 terrain. One deputy reportedly turned pale immediately. The location resembled Blackwater Lake, nearly 90 miles west of where the child was found. An abandoned church once stood there decades earlier before fire destroyed most of the structure. Search teams deployed within hours. Rain hammered the forest roads as officers moved through dense woods surrounding the lake. The church ruins appeared exactly where the drawing suggested, burned foundations half swallowed by vines and mud near the shoreline. At first, investigators believed the lead another dead end. Then cadaver dog alerted behind the collapsed altar. Excavation crews uncovered a hidden cellar entrance buried beneath debris and ash. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Flashlights illuminated narrow stairs descending underground beneath the ruined church. The smell hit investigators first. Dampness, rotting wood, old smoke trapped beneath concrete for years. Then they found the room. Small, windowless, chains bolted into walls, children's blankets piled beside rusted buckets, and scratched repeatedly across the concrete floor in uneven childish handwriting were names. Dozens of names, some partly erased, others layered atop, one another over time. Detectives stood frozen inside the underground chamber while forensic photographers documented everything. Most names matched nobody in state databases, but one name appeared more than any other. Lily. Federal analysts raced back to the hospital, immediately hoping the discovery might trigger recognition. Detective Bennett entered the child's room, carefully carrying photographs from a cellar. The little girl looked toward the images only briefly before her face drained completely of color. She began trembling violently. Bennett asked softly whether she knew the place beneath the church. The child nodded once. Tears filled her eyes immediately afterward. Then, for the first time since the investigation began, she whispered a name aloud. Lily was my friend. Silence swallowed the room. Bennett asked who Lily was. The child stared at the floor for several seconds before answering quietly. She couldn't stop crying. He took her outside after the storm. Detective Bennett felt cold move through her chest instantly because investigators already suspected. Multiple children passed through the underground chamber. Now the little girl confirmed it directly. Bennett pushed gently. What happened after Lily went outside? The child answered in a near whisper. She never came back. Search operations around Blackwater Lake intensified into one of the largest forensic excavations in state history. Cadaver dogs swept surrounding forests while divers searched the lake bottom for remains. Within 3 days, authorities uncovered shallow graves containing bones from at least 4 children, buried less than a mile from the burned church ruins. The country reacted with horror bordering on panic. Ghost child linked to child graveyard. How many victims are still missing? Candlelight vigils formed nationwide, while politicians demanded federal intervention into unidentified child disappearances stretching back decades. But behind closed doors, investigators faced an even darker realization. The girl beside Highway 41 may not have escaped from a single abductor. She may have survived an entire hidden system involving multiple victims over many years. Then the investigation took another terrifying turn. Forensic technicians restoring the damaged cassette tape recovered from the swamp van managed, extracting several seconds of usable audio buried beneath static. The recording began with rain hammering against metal somewhere nearby. Then a little girl's voice whispered shakily into the darkness, "Please don't leave me here." Another child cried softly in the background. Then a man's voice entered the tape. Calm, emotionless. Names don't matter anymore. The laboratory reportedly fell completely silent, because immediately afterward came a sound investigators recognized from the hospital interview. Recordings instantly. The ghost child screaming. The audio recording broke something inside the investigation because until that moment detectives still clung privately to the hope that the ghost child escaped a single predator. One violent man operating in isolation somewhere along forgotten highways and wooded backroads. But the moment analysts isolated the second crying voice hidden behind static on the cassette tape, the entire case widened into something far more terrifying. Another child had been there, another victim, possibly many more. Federal authorities upgraded the operation overnight into a multi-state homicide and trafficking investigation while media coverage exploded beyond anything local law enforcement could control. The little girl found beside Highway 41 no longer represented only an unsolved identity mystery. She became living evidence of a hidden nightmare nobody fully understood. The hospital housing her transformed into a fortress within hours. Armed marshals guarded every entrance. Visitor records were scrutinized obsessively. Yet despite the increased security, fear spread rapidly among investigators because someone connected to the child still remained free. Someone who might already know the tape had been recovered. Detective Laura Bennett barely slept during those days. She spent endless hours inside dim evidence rooms, replaying the restored audio repeatedly through headphones while staring at photographs from the underground church chamber near Blackwater Lake. The names scratched into the concrete haunted her most. Dozens of children, some letters written carefully, others carved violently deep into the floor as though tiny hands pressed against the concrete while terrified. Then Bennett noticed something strange overlooked initially during documentation. One name appeared beneath multiple layers of scratches and marks. Grace, not scratched once. Written over and over in different handwriting styles, different sizes, different depths. Almost like several children repeated the same name across years. Analysts checked missing persons databases again. Hundreds of possible matches surfaced nationwide. Too many. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued excavating graves near the church ruins while rainstorms turned the forest into thick black mud, swallowing boots and machinery alike. Reporters camped beside police barricades 24 hours a day, broadcasting live updates beneath headlines about America's hidden child cemetery. Then another body surfaced, This one not skeletal. Preserved partially beneath swamp water less than half a mile from the church. Female, approximately 12 years old. Red sweater, still clinging to the remains. Detectives immediately suspected she might be Lily, the crying child mentioned by the ghost child. During therapy, dental records eventually confirmed the victim had vanished 7 years earlier from a county fair, nearly 300 miles away. Her disappearance was never connected to other cases at the time. Now investigators realized the horror. Children from different states somehow ended up buried near Blackwater Lake over many years without law enforcement recognizing the pattern. The nation became consumed by fear and outrage simultaneously. Hotline tips flooded federal offices, so aggressively agents struggled processing them all. Survivors of childhood abuse began calling news stations claiming memories of cabins, churches, faceless men, underground rooms. Some stories proved false quickly. Others remained disturbingly plausible. Meanwhile, politicians demanded answers about whether law enforcement failures allowed predators to operate undetected across jurisdictions for decades. Yet amid the growing chaos, the ghost child herself remained trapped inside silence and fragmented memories. Therapists observed subtle changes after discovery of the church chamber and graves. She became less emotionally frozen, more frightened, like someone realizing hidden secrets were finally surfacing after years buried in darkness. Sometimes she asked strange questions during late-night counseling sessions. Do dead people stay cold forever? Can rain wash blood away? If someone changes your name, are you still the same person? Every sentence unsettled investigators because the child spoke less like a 6-year-old and more like someone forced to grow up inside horror long before being found beside Highway 41. Then came the nightmare that nearly destroyed the case entirely. At 1:47 a.m. during a violent thunderstorm, the hospital lost power across 2 entire floors. Backup generators activated seconds later, but security cameras glitched simultaneously throughout the pediatric wing. Federal marshals rushed toward the ghost child's room, immediately fearing intrusion. They found the hallway empty except for muddy water trailing across the floor beneath emergency lights. The child's door stood open, her bed empty. Panic detonated through the hospital. Lockdowns triggered instantly while armed officers flooded stairwells and parking garages. Detective Bennett arrived minutes later, already convinced the worst had happened. Then a nurse screamed from the hospital chapel downstairs. Investigators found the ghost child crouched alone behind pews in total darkness, clutching her eyeless doll against her chest. She was crying silently, not panicked, just devastated. Bennett knelt carefully beside her, asking what happened. The child whispered something investigators would later describe as the moment the entire case changed forever. He came back. Bennett demanded who came back. The little girl pointed toward the rain-streaked chapel windows. The man with no eyes. Security footage from exterior cameras revealed something horrifying moments later. During the blackout, a tall figure in a dark raincoat entered the hospital grounds briefly before disappearing near the pediatric wing. The cameras never captured the person's face clearly because every frame distorted strangely during the storm. Yet investigators identified one chilling detail immediately. The figure carried something long in one hand, a shovel. Authorities launched the largest manhunt in state history by dawn. Helicopters swept forests surrounding the city. Roadblocks expanded across multiple counties. Behavioral profilers warned the suspect likely monitored media coverage obsessively and might attempt reclaiming or silencing the child before she revealed more memories. But despite nationwide searches, no suspect emerged. Instead, another disturbing development surfaced from forensic analysis of evidence inside the underground church chamber. Hair samples recovered from blankets and clothing belonged not only to children, but at least 3 different adult males, multiple perpetrators. The realization sent waves of dread through investigators already overwhelmed by mounting graves and disappearances. Then came the discovery that pushed the task force toward outright horror. Forensic technicians examining one wall inside the underground chamber noticed faint markings hidden beneath smoke damage from the church fire years earlier. Ultraviolet lighting revealed crude symbols burned directly into the concrete alongside dates, spanning nearly 15 years. Some corresponded exactly to known child disappearances across multiple states. Someone documented victims systematically beneath the church. And near the center of the wall, investigators found a phrase written in large, uneven letters. He watches the ones nobody looks for. Reporters leaked details within hours. Public panic intensified immediately. Parents feared organized networks abducting vulnerable children nationwide. Vigil groups formed online, sharing conspiracy theories about cults and hidden trafficking routes through rural highways. Yet Detective Bennett focused increasingly on the child herself because something about the recent events felt wrong. The hospital intrusion, the shovel, the repeated appearance of the faceless figure during storms. It all resembled psychological intimidation more than direct abduction attempts. Almost like someone wanted the child terrified enough to stop talking. Then Bennett noticed another pattern. Every time the ghost child became emotionally distressed, she repeated references to rain. Rainstorms during interviews, rain around the church, rain on the cassette tape, rain beside Highway 41 the night she appeared. Bennett began suspecting the weather itself triggered traumatic memories buried too deeply for conscious recall. So during one carefully supervised therapy session, she tried something unconventional. She played recorded thunderstorm sounds softly through speakers while the child colored quietly at a table. At first, nothing happened. Then the little girl froze completely. Her crayon stopped moving. She stared at the paper silently for nearly 30 seconds before beginning another drawing unlike anything investigators had seen yet. Not a cabin, not faceless adults. This time she drew a long building with large windows beside water. Children standing inside, looking outward while heavy rain fell across the glass. At the far edge of the drawing stood a man wearing black gloves beside a bell tower. Above the image, the child wrote 3 shaky words. The school by water. Detective Bennett felt adrenaline hit instantly because nobody had ever mentioned schools near lakes to the child. Yet something about the drawing felt painfully specific again. Bennett asked carefully where the building was. The little girl answered without hesitation this time, where Grace disappeared. Silence swallowed the therapy room. Bennett asked who Grace was. The child's hands began trembling violently around the black crayon. Tears slid down her face silently while thunder rolled through the speakers overhead. Then she whispered the sentence that sent investigators rushing toward another buried nightmare. Before dawn even arrived, Grace was my sister. The moment the ghost child whispered the words, Grace was my sister, the entire investigation shifted from horrifying to almost unbearable because for the first time detectives had proof the little girl remembered someone from her life before Highway 41. A sister, a real connection, a name repeated endlessly beneath the burned church near Blackwater Lake. Detective Laura Bennett reportedly felt her pulse pounding so hard she could barely keep her voice steady while continuing the interview. She asked softly where Grace was now. The child stared at the thunderstorm drawing in silence for several seconds before answering in a near whisper. He took her downstairs after the singing stopped. Bennett asked who took her. The little girl's face tightened immediately. Terror returned. The man with no eyes. Then she refused speaking again for the rest of the night. But investigators already had enough to move aggressively. Federal analysts reopened every unidentified sibling disappearance connected to missing girls near the appropriate age range. They cross-referenced victims linked to lakeside schools, religious institutions, foster care systems, and child trafficking reports stretching back nearly 20 years. Thousands of files flooded the task force. Too many possibilities. Yet one detail from the drawing stood out immediately: the bell tower beside the building. Detectives circulated the sketch nationwide through architectural databases and historical registries, searching for abandoned schools near water with distinctive tower structures. Within 24 hours, an analyst in Wisconsin flagged a possible match. St. Margaret's Boarding Academy, closed abruptly 14 years earlier after severe flooding damaged the property beyond repair. The school sat beside Greywater Reservoir, nearly 200 miles north of Blackwater Lake. Even more disturbing, 5 children disappeared from the surrounding county during the decade before the academy shut down. None were ever found. Search teams deployed before sunrise under heavy media blackout, hoping to avoid another frenzy. Before verifying the lead, Greywater Reservoir looked dead when investigators arrived. Black water stretching endlessly beneath low storm clouds. Pine trees bending in cold wind. The abandoned academy standing crooked near the shoreline, like something forgotten by time itself. Windows shattered. Bell tower leaning slightly from flood damage. Yet the moment Detective Bennett stepped from her vehicle and saw the building through falling rain, she reportedly knew instantly the ghost child had been there. The structure matched the drawing perfectly. Federal agents entered cautiously through rotting hallways covered in mold and peeling paint. Classrooms remained filled with overturned desks and water damage from years of neglect. At first, the academy appeared abandoned exactly as records suggested. Then investigators reached the lower level beneath the old dormitory wing. Fresh cigarette ash littered the floor near a locked maintenance corridor. Someone had been inside recently. Tactical teams moved deeper underground immediately. The corridor descended toward partially flooded basement tunnels originally designed for boiler systems and storm drainage. The air smelled stale, metallic, wrong. Then flashlights illuminated another steel door bolted from the outside. Everyone froze. It looked almost identical to the underground chamber discovered beneath the burned church near Blackwater Lake. Agents forced entry carefully. The room beyond sent shockwaves through the investigation. Small beds lined concrete walls beneath rusted chains and exposed pipes. Children's drawings covered sections of the ceiling. Old cassette tapes filled shelves near mold-covered cabinets. And scratched deeply into one wall, investigators found dozens of names layered over one another. Exactly like the church cellar. Grace appeared there repeatedly too, but another word appeared beside it this time. Teacher. Detectives immediately realized the academy itself may have functioned as another holding site, connected to the same hidden network surrounding the ghost child. Then forensic teams uncovered something even worse. Hidden beneath loose concrete in a flooded corner of the chamber lay stacks of school records, preserved inside sealed plastic containers. Many student names were fake or incomplete, but photographs attached to several files showed children investigators recognized for missing persons databases nationwide. Some victims vanished officially from bus stops. Others disappeared from foster homes or county fairs. Yet according to the academy records, many of them attended St. Margaret's under different identities for months before vanishing permanently. The implications horrified federal authorities. Children weren't merely abducted randomly. They were being hidden systematically, renamed, moved between locations, erased. News of the Greywater Academy raid leaked before officials could contain it. Helicopters circled overhead by afternoon while national broadcasts exploded with terrifying headlines. Second secret child facility found. Did predators operate hidden schools across America? Public fear reached levels investigators struggled to manage. Parents flooded schools demanding security reviews. Former students from St. Margaret's came forward describing strict discipline. Nighttime punishments and strange locked basement area staff forbade anyone discussing. One former groundskeeper told reporters he heard children crying underground during Storm's years. Before the academy closed, but nobody believed him. Meanwhile, forensic specialists cataloged evidence from the hidden basement. The cassette tapes proved especially disturbing. Most contained children singing nursery rhymes softly under adult supervision. Others recorded therapy-style conversations involving unidentified men questioning frightened children about names, obedience, and family memories. But one tape changed everything. Halfway through the damaged recording, investigators heard two little girls whispering together somewhere beneath heavy rain. One voice matched the ghost child almost immediately. The second child sounded older, calmer. "You have to remember our real names," the older girl whispered urgently. "Promise me." Then the younger child asked a question that silenced the forensic lab completely. "What if he takes him away again?" The older voice answered softly. "Then we hide them inside songs." Detective Bennett replayed the tape over and over afterward because the emotional weight of the conversation felt devastating. Grace understood what was happening. She knew someone systematically erased identities from the children trapped inside those underground rooms, and somehow she tried preserving memories through songs. Then analysts enhanced background noise hidden beneath the tape distortion and discovered another terrifying detail: a bell ringing slowly somewhere nearby. St. Margaret's Tower bell. The recording happened inside the academy basement. Suddenly, investigators realized the ghost child may have spent years moving between Blackwater Lake and Greywater Reservoir under control of whoever operated the hidden facilities. Yet the biggest revelation surfaced later that evening during forensic review of school documents. One teacher's name appeared repeatedly across administrative files tied directly to basement access, permissions, and unauthorized student transfers. Elias Vane, officially listed as a behavioral counselor at St. Margaret's for nearly 12 years before, vanishing after the academy closed. Detectives searching employment records uncovered almost nothing about him beyond fragments: no birth certificate, no military history, no surviving relatives. Yet one photograph recovered from an old staff directory stopped the task force cold instantly. Tall, thin, hollow face, dark raincoat, eyes obscured by shadow beneath the poor quality image. Detective Bennett felt genuine nausea staring at the photograph because, even blurred and grainy, the man resembled the figure captured outside the hospital during the blackout storm. The ghost child saw him again. Elias Vane might still be alive. Federal agencies launched a nationwide search immediately while profilers dissected every available detail surrounding the mysterious counselor. Witnesses described him as quiet, deeply controlling, obsessed with discipline and storms. Several former students remembered him carrying a black umbrella everywhere, even during clear weather. One woman broke down crying during interviews after recalling how Vane punished children who spoke their old names aloud. The investigation now centered almost entirely around him. But while authorities searched desperately for Elias Vane, the ghost child herself began unraveling psychologically beneath resurfacing memories. She stopped responding to nurses, refused food again, sat awake through entire nights humming soft nursery melodies investigators later matched to songs recorded on the basement cassette tapes from St. Margaret's. Then, during another violent thunderstorm striking the city, the little girl suddenly attacked one of the therapy room walls with crayons, writing words over and over so aggressively the paper tore beneath her hands. Detective Bennett arrived moments later and found the child crying silently beside the shredded drawings. Across the walls, she had written only one sentence dozens of times in black wax. Grace is still alive. The room fell silent. Bennett knelt beside her carefully. How do you know? The child looked upward slowly, eyes wide with terror. Thunder rolled outside the hospital windows while rain hammered the glass hard enough to shake the room. Then the ghost child whispered the sentence that sent cold panic through every investigator listening nearby. Because he still visits her. The sentence spread through the task force like poison, because until that moment investigators believed Grace most likely lay buried somewhere beneath the forest surrounding Blackwater Lake or Graywater Reservoir beside the other recovered children. But the instant the ghost child whispered, because he still visits her, every assumption collapsed. Detective Laura Bennett stared at the little girl for several seconds without speaking, trying desperately to decide whether the statement reflected trauma, fantasy, or memory. The child's expression answered the question before words could. Pure terror. Real terror. Not confusion. Not imagination. She believed Grace was alive somewhere, and Elias Vane was still with her. Federal agents launched emergency operations before dawn, searching every property, abandoned institution, foster registry, and religious facility connected even remotely to St. Margaret's Academy or Blackwater Lake. Helicopters swept wilderness regions, while analysts reopened missing child investigations nationwide, looking specifically for older, unidentified female survivors hidden under false identities. News leaks triggered immediate hysteria. Second child survivor may still be alive. Did the ghost child's sister escape? The public became consumed again by the nightmare unfolding beneath decades of buried disappearances. But behind the media frenzy, investigators faced a more terrifying possibility quietly discussed only inside secured briefing rooms. If Grace survived, why had she never come forward? The answer emerged gradually through deeper examination of the Academy recordings. Forensic specialists enhanced hours of damage tapes recovered from the flooded basement beneath St. Margaret's. Most contained indoctrination sessions, children repeating phrases about obedience, forgetting old names, remaining silent during storms. But scattered among the recordings, investigators discovered conversations between Elias Vane and unidentified adults discussing transfers, placements, and reconditioning. The language sounded clinical, organized. One tape recorded shortly before the Academy shut down included a sentence that reportedly made experienced federal agents go silent. The older girl remembers too much, Vane said calmly. She'll need permanent isolation. Detectives believed immediately he referred to Grace. Then another voice on the tape asked a question that changed the investigation permanently. What about the younger sister? Silence followed several seconds before Elias Vane answered in a flat, emotionless tone. She still breaks correctly. The words haunted everyone who heard them because suddenly investigators understood why the ghost child behaved the way she did. The discipline, the emotional suppression, the terror surrounding names. She had not merely survived abuse. She had been psychologically conditioned for years, raised inside fear until identity itself became dangerous. Meanwhile, forensic searches around Graywater Reservoir uncovered additional graves hidden beneath collapsed drainage tunnels near the Academy shoreline. For more child victims surfaced within days. Some disappeared over a decade apart. Yet all shared similar injuries and evidence of prolonged confinement before death. The scale of the operation surrounding Elias Vane became impossible to ignore now. Investigators no longer hunted a lone predator. They hunted remnants of a hidden system that stole vulnerable children across multiple states and erased them from the world. Then came the first real lead pointing toward Grace herself. A social worker in Montana contacted federal authorities after seeing televised sketches connected to the case. 23 years earlier, she encountered a teenage girl wandering alone near a roadside shelter during winter storms. The girl carried no identification, refused giving her name, and vanished before authorities arrived. But one detail haunted the social worker after seeing coverage of the ghost child investigation. The teenager repeatedly hummed an old nursery song later identified as identical to melodies, recorded on the St. Margaret basement tapes. Detectives flew to Montana immediately. Shelter records from the period were incomplete, but one employee remembered the mysterious teenager vividly. Thin, quiet, terrified of man, scar across her left shoulder. He also recalled something stranger. Before disappearing, the girl asked whether storms could carry voices through walls. Investigators showed the witness photographs of recovered child victims from Graywater Lake. The man pointed toward Grace's reconstructed image almost instantly. "That's her," he whispered. "Older, but that's the girl." Suddenly hope surged through the task force for the first time in months. Grace survived St. Margaret's, at least briefly. But where did she go afterward? Why vanish again? Analysts retraced every clue surrounding the Montana sighting and uncovered another disturbing connection. The roadside shelter sat less than 30 miles from a psychiatric institution investigated quietly during the late 90s for illegal restraint practices involving juvenile patients. The facility closed years later after multiple abuse allegations surfaced. And among former staff records, investigators discovered a familiar name, Elias Vane. The realization sent fresh panic through federal command because it suggested Vane continued operating inside child institutions long after St. Margaret's collapsed. Yet despite the growing evidence, the man himself remained invisible. No verified fingerprints, no confirmed birth identity, no financial records beyond scattered aliases. It was as though Elias Vane existed only inside places where vulnerable children disappeared. Then the ghost child suffered another breakdown that shattered investigators emotionally. During a supervised art therapy session, she suddenly began drawing frantically after hearing distant church bells from somewhere outside the hospital grounds. Nurses watched helplessly as she filled page after page with violent black crayon images, flooded hallways, chained doors, children standing underwater. Finally, she stopped and stared blankly at the final drawing in silence. Detective Bennett picked up the paper carefully. The image showed two little girls holding hands beside a deep rectangular pit. One child wore a yellow raincoat. The other stood partially inside darkness beneath the ground. Above them loomed a tall, faceless figure holding an umbrella. But near the bottom corner, the ghost child wrote 6 words investigators never forgot. Grace stayed so I could run. Bennett felt her throat tighten immediately because suddenly another horrifying possibility emerged. What if Grace didn't escape with her sister because she sacrificed herself somehow during the escape? Bennett asked carefully what happened the night the ghost child reached Highway 41. The child trembled violently, but answered more than ever before. Rain, screaming, running through trees, a locked room beneath water pipes. Grace pushing her through a broken fence while someone shouted nearby. Then the little girl whispered something so softly Bennett almost missed it. Grace told me not to look back. Search teams revisited every mile between Graywater Reservoir and Highway 41, hoping reconstructing the escape route might uncover hidden locations or burial sites. Then a retired truck mechanic contacted authorities after recognizing Elias Vane's photograph. Broadcast nationwide. 28 years earlier, the mechanic repaired a dark utility van matching the swamp vehicle description at a roadside garage outside Cedar County. He remembered the driver because the man carried old cassette tapes filled with children singing. But another detail froze investigators instantly. A teenage girl sat silently in the passenger seat during repairs. Blonde hair, thin frame, terrified expression. And when a mechanic offered her water privately, She whispered only one sentence before the driver returned. "Please tell Grace I tried." Detectives stared at the interview transcript in stunned silence because the timeline no longer fit. Neatly, the teenage girl could not have been the ghost child herself based on age estimates, which meant another unidentified survivor existed somewhere beyond Grace. Another child connected to the hidden facilities operated by Elias Vane. The investigation expanded again into overwhelming darkness. How many children truly passed through St. Margaret's and Blackwater Lake? How many survived? Then came the event that pushed the nation toward outright fear. Late one evening during heavy rainstorms, officers guarding the ghost child's hospital floor discovered a package left outside the secured pediatric entrance with no surveillance footage showing who delivered it. Inside sat a black umbrella dripping rainwater across white tissue paper. Attached to the handle was a cassette tape labeled only with 2 handwritten words: "For Grace." Federal bomb technicians cleared the package immediately before analysts played the tape inside a secure laboratory. Static filled the recording at first. Then children singing softly emerged beneath crackling rain sounds. The melody matched songs from St. Margaret's basement. Halfway through the tape, the singing stopped abruptly. A man's calm voice entered next. "You should never have looked for her." Silence followed several seconds before another sound surfaced faintly beneath the rain. A woman crying. Then a terrified female voice whispered directly into the recorder. "Laura, he knows where she is." Detective Bennett reportedly turned pale the instant she recognized the speaker. It was the ghost child's voice. Older, adult, and still terrified. The recording detonated through the investigation like a bomb because the impossible detail was not the threat itself, not the black umbrella, not even the implication that Elias Vane remained close enough to taunt federal authorities directly after 30 years of buried crimes. It was the voice, older, adult. The ghost child hearing herself on that cassette shattered every assumption investigators built around the case. Detective Laura Bennett listened to the tape alone 3 times before allowing analysts back into the room because the emotional weight of it felt almost unreal. The frightened woman whispering, "Laura, he knows where she is," sounded unmistakably like the child, sleeping under armed guard inside the hospital upstairs, only decades older. Same cadence, same breath patterns, same slight tremble on certain words, yet impossible. Unless the tape itself was old. But forensic analysis delivered an even more disturbing conclusion by dawn. The cassette was recent, manufactured only 2 years earlier, which meant someone had recorded an adult woman whose voice matched the ghost child almost perfectly. Within the last 24 months, federal investigators split immediately into competing theories. Some believe Grace survived adulthood and resembled her sister closely enough to create confusion. Others feared something far darker. The ghost child herself might not actually be 6 years old at all. Detective Bennett rejected the idea instantly at first because medical evaluations clearly identified the child as approximately 6 to 7 years old physically. Yet certain details had always unsettled experts. Her unusual speech patterns, fragmented memories spanning apparently impossible timelines, emotional conditioning far beyond her developmental stage. Then forensic psychologists reviewing the case files uncovered another anomaly overlooked for months. The child's dental development suggested chronic malnutrition severe enough to distort age estimation significantly. Suddenly, the unthinkable entered official discussion quietly behind closed doors. What if the ghost child was older than everyone believed? Meanwhile, national panic surrounding the investigation intensified into near hysteria. The image of the black umbrella left outside a secured pediatric wing dominated every major news network. Commentators accused federal agencies of losing control entirely while parents nationwide feared an invisible predator capable of infiltrating hospitals and taunting authorities openly. Hotlines exploded again with sightings of tall men in raincoats near schools, bus stations, churches. Most tips proved useless, but one call stopped investigators cold. A motel clerk in northern Arkansas reported a quiet woman matching age-progressed sketches of Grace. Checked into a roadside room 3 nights earlier, carrying only a black duffel bag and an eyeless doll wrapped carefully in towels. She disappeared before authorities arrived. But inside the room, cleaners found waterlogged notebook pages covered in repeated handwriting. He still watches the storms. Detectives rushed to Arkansas immediately. The motel security footage was grainy but usable. A thin woman wearing oversized clothing entered the building shortly after midnight during heavy rain. Her face remained hidden beneath a hood most of the time. Yet when she turned briefly toward the lobby camera, Detective Bennett felt chills crawl through her body because the resemblance to the ghost child was unmistakable. Same eyes, same sharp cheekbones, older, exhausted, traumatized, but undeniably connected. Then another horrifying detail emerged from the footage. Several minutes after the woman entered her motel room, a tall figure carrying a black umbrella walked slowly past the exterior window and stopped outside her door. The footage glitched heavily from storm interference before the figure vanished completely. The woman fled less than 10 minutes later. Federal authorities now believed Grace almost certainly survived into adulthood and remained actively hunted by Elias Vane decades after escaping the hidden facilities. But why contact investigators now, after years hidden? The answer surfaced unexpectedly through forensic restoration of the notebook pages recovered from the motel room. Most contained fragmented sentences about rain, bells, and names. But buried between the writings, investigators uncovered a rough, hand-drawn map leading toward an isolated coastal region in Maine beside an abandoned Catholic orphanage closed since the late 70s after abuse allegations surfaced. Detectives immediately recognized the pattern. Another institution connected to vulnerable children. Another possible location tied to Elias Vane. Search teams deployed under total media secrecy, hoping finally to stay ahead of whoever shadowed the investigation from darkness. The orphanage stood on cliffs overlooking violent gray ocean water beneath constant rainstorms, sweeping inland from the Atlantic. Windows boarded, bell tower partially collapsed. It looked eerily similar to St. Margaret's Academy. Federal agents entered cautiously through flooded corridors filled with mold and sea rot. At first, the building appeared empty for decades. Then officers discovered cigarette butts near the lower stairwell. Fresh. Tactical teams descended immediately toward underground utility tunnels beneath the orphanage. Foundation. The air below felt freezing, claustrophobic. Flashlights revealed another hidden chamber concealed behind rusted maintenance doors. Smaller than the others, but unmistakably part of the same network. Children's beds, chains, drawings scratched into concrete walls. And in the center of the room, investigators found a tape recorder still plugged into an extension. Cord humming softly in the darkness. Detective Bennett pressed stop carefully. The cassette inside was still warm. Someone had been there recently. Then agents discovered blood near the rear drainage corridor leading towards sea caves beneath the cliffs. Search dogs tracked the scent through narrow tunnels carved by ocean erosion beneath the orphanage. Finally, the tunnels opened into a cavern facing crashing black water outside. There, investigators found signs of violent struggle scattered across wet stone, shell casings. Broken flashlight glass, blood smeared along the cave wall. But no bodies. Then one officer noticed something floating near the tide pools beneath the cave entrance. An eyeless plastic doll. The same doll found with the ghost child beside Highway 41. Detective Bennett reportedly felt genuine panic for the first time during the investigation because suddenly the impossible theory seemed unavoidable. Someone connected directly to the child had been inside the cave recently, perhaps even the ghost child herself. Then forensic analysts examining blood from the scene delivered another shock. 2 separate female DNA profiles appeared in the cavern. One matched the ghost child. The other matched remains recovered from the Blackwater Lake graves years earlier. Grace. Silence swallowed the command center once results arrived because the implications seemed impossible. Grace's DNA was present recently despite investigators believing she likely died decades earlier. Even more disturbing, forensic degradation suggested the Blackwater samples originally identified as Grace might actually belong to another child entirely. The task force realized with growing horror they misidentified one of the earliest victims. Grace may have survived all along. Then came the call that changed everything again. At 3:11 a.m., Detective Laura Bennett's private phone rang from an untraceable number. Rain hammered against her apartment windows while she answered cautiously. Silence greeted her first, heavy breathing. Then a woman whispered shakily into the line. "Laura." Bennett froze instantly. The voice matched the adult woman from the cassette tape perfectly. "Who is this?" Bennett demanded. The woman began crying softly. "You have to stop looking underground." Bennett's pulse surged. "Grace." More silence. Then the woman whispered something that made Bennett's blood run cold. "He makes them forget themselves down there." Thunder exploded outside as the line crackled violently. Bennett asked where she was. The woman answered immediately this time. "He's taking her north." Bennett shouted for clarification, but another voice entered the call suddenly before the connection. "Died. Male. Calm. Familiar. You were warned already." The line went dead. Federal authorities traced the call origin partially before signal loss. Northern Vermont, near the Canadian border. Tactical units mobilized within minutes, while helicopters launched through storm conditions despite dangerous visibility. Investigators believed Elias Vane was moving either Grace or another unidentified female victim. Across remote rural territory under cover of the weather, he seemed to prefer obsessively. But before the task force could fully organize pursuit operations, Detective Bennett received another package delivered directly to her apartment lobby without witnesses seeing the courier. Inside sat a single photograph, black and white, water-damaged. 2 little girls standing beside a lake holding hands beneath heavy rain. One wore a yellow raincoat. The other smiled toward the camera. On the back, someone had written 6 words in jagged black ink. "Only one sister escaped that night." The photograph shattered Detective Laura Bennett more than any crime scene or grave discovered during the investigation, because until that moment, she still believed the ghost child and Grace escaped together somehow before being separated later by fear, trauma, or years spent hiding from Elias Vane. But the sentence written across the back of the image changed everything instantly. "Only one sister escaped that night." Bennett stared at the faded black and white picture beneath the dim kitchen light, while rain hammered against apartment windows outside. And for the first time since the case began, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that Grace never truly escaped at all. The woman calling her, the adult voice on the cassette tape, the sightings across different states. What if those moments were not proof of survival, but evidence of something much darker, a prisoner, moved repeatedly over decades by the same man who erased children's identities until they no longer recognized themselves? Federal agents mobilized across northern Vermont before sunrise after tracing fragments of the phone. Signal near isolated woodland highways close to the Canadian border. Helicopters swept dense forests while tactical teams searched abandoned farms, churches, motels, and service roads hidden beneath violent storm conditions. The weather itself seemed cursed now. Every major breakthrough in the investigation arrived alongside rainstorms heavy enough to erase tracks and drown visibility. Behavioral profilers began suspecting Elias Vane intentionally used severe weather as operational cover for decades. Storm noise concealed movement. Flooding destroyed evidence. Empty roads reduced witnesses. And perhaps most terrifying of all, storms triggered traumatic compliance in surviving victims conditioned from childhood inside underground chambers where rain and thunder became psychological weapons. Meanwhile, the ghost child deteriorated emotionally after investigators recovered the photograph. Nurses reported she stopped responding to her temporary name entirely, refused eye contact, sat motionless beside hospital windows for hours watching rain slide across the glass. Then one evening during another thunderstorm, she spoke suddenly to a night nurse without warning. Grace never stopped running. The nurse asked what she meant. The child answered quietly while clutching the eyeless doll against her chest. "You let me go because she stayed behind." Detective Bennett felt physically sick after hearing the statement because now the fragmented pieces formed a horrifying picture. Grace may have sacrificed herself deliberately so her younger sister could escape the hidden network surrounding St. Margaret's and Blackwater Lake. But if true, why keep Grace alive afterward? The answer emerged through deeper forensic analysis of recovered tapes from the Coastal Orphanage in Maine. Audio specialists restored sections previously considered unusable due to water damage, buried beneath static and crashing ocean sounds. Investigators discovered recordings of structured interviews between Elias Vane and an older female subject believed strongly to be Grace. The conversations stretched across years. On tape after tape, Vane attempted forcing the woman to reject her original identity through repetitive conditioning. "What was your first name?" he would ask calmly. Long silences followed, most times before the woman answered differently in each recording. Anna, Marie, Beth, Claire, never Grace, never the truth. Then one tape changed the entire emotional landscape of the investigation. The woman suddenly laughed during questioning. Weak, broken, but unmistakably defiant. "You can change names forever," she whispered. "But she still remembers me." Elias Vane responded immediately in a tone colder than anything. "Previously recovered. Then I'll erase both of you." The laboratory reportedly went silent after the tape ended because investigators finally understood the obsession driving the entire nightmare. The ghost child and Grace represented failure to Elias Vane, surviving memories, surviving identities, living evidence that his system of control could break. Then came another horrifying revelation. Forensic psychologists reviewing decades of recordings concluded Grace likely spent most of her life in captivity, moving between hidden facilities controlled by Vane and possibly others connected to him. Yet despite prolonged abuse and conditioning, she repeatedly resisted forgetting her sister. The songs, the whispered names, the coded messages hidden in drawings and tapes. Grace spent decades trying to preserve memory inside a world built entirely around erasing it. Public reaction to leaked details surrounding the recordings became explosive. Vigils formed nationwide, honoring unidentified child victims recovered from hidden graves, while survivors of institutional abuse flooded media outlets with stories eerily similar to St. Margaret's methods: punishment during storms, forced name changes, underground isolation rooms. Politicians demanded federal investigations into dozens of defunct orphanages and psychiatric facilities across the country. The case transformed from mystery into national reckoning. But inside the task force, fear intensified because Elias Vane remained free despite unprecedented attention. Worse still, he appeared increasingly desperate. Then another body surfaced. A state trooper in Vermont discovered a wrecked sedan abandoned near forest roads after floodwaters, reseeded from overnight storms. Blood covered the driver's seat. One window shattered outward from gunfire. And inside the trunk, officers found stacks of cassette tapes alongside faded photographs of missing children dating back nearly 30 years. Detectives rushed toward the scene, immediately fearing they finally cornered Vane or Grace. But the most disturbing discovery waited beneath the passenger seat. A handwritten notebook filled with fragmented observations about the ghost child investigation. Someone had been monitoring the case obsessively in real time. News broadcasts, detective assignments, hospital security rotations. Even Laura Bennett's apartment address appeared inside the pages. Yet one final entry near the back froze investigators completely. She remembers the lake now. The notebook ended there abruptly. Search dogs tracked blood from the sedan into nearby woods where floodwater swallowed most usable evidence. Helicopters searched through rain and fog until dawn. Finally, officers discovered a cabin hidden beside an abandoned logging trail deep in the mountains. Smoke drifted faintly from the chimney. Tactical teams surrounded the structure silently before breaching at sunrise. The scene inside felt less like a hideout and more like a shrine to stolen childhoods. Children's drawings covered walls from floor to ceiling. Newspaper clippings about missing persons layered beneath photographs of storms, lakes, churches, and faceless silhouettes standing beneath umbrellas. One room contained shelves lined entirely with cassette tapes labeled by girls' names. Grace appeared dozens of times, but another detail chilled investigators instantly. Recent photographs of the ghost child sleeping inside her hospital room had been taken secretly. Through the window, Elias Vane had been watching her personally. Then agents discovered the basement. Narrow stairs descended beneath the cabin toward another underground chamber nearly identical to the previous hidden rooms. But this one remained active, blankets still warm, food half-eaten on a small table. And chained to exposed pipes near the back wall, officers found a woman barely conscious beneath. Layers of blankets soaked with blood. Detective Bennett reportedly stopped breathing the moment paramedics lifted the woman's face toward flashlight beams. Thin, malnourished, mid-30s, long blonde hair streaked with gray. A faded scar crossing her shoulder exactly where witnesses described years earlier. Grace, alive, 30 years after disappearing into darkness beside her younger sister. The rescue operation erupted into chaos instantly, while medics stabilized the severely injured woman. For emergency transport, Grace drifted in and out of consciousness repeatedly during evacuation. But before paramedics loaded her into helicopters, she grabbed Detective Bennett's wrist weakly and whispered something investigators never released publicly. "He's not alone." Federal command froze immediately after hearing the statement, because despite years hunting Elias Vane as central architect behind the hidden facilities, evidence increasingly suggested broader involvement stretching across decades and institutions nationwide. Yet before Grace could provide further details, another catastrophe struck. As helicopters lifted through storm conditions above the mountains, officers guarding the cabin perimeter heard gunshots echo through nearby woods. Tactical units pursued immediately, but visibility collapsed beneath heavy rain and fog. Then one officer found fresh footprints leading toward a cliffside overlook above the flooded valley. Below, a black umbrella lay abandoned near the edge beside cigarette ash dissolving in rainwater. No body, no suspect. Elias Vane vanished again into the storm. But hours later, while Grace fought for survival inside a secure trauma unit surrounded by armed federal guards, Detective Bennett finally sat beside the ghost child and told her quietly the truth she spent decades trying to uncover. "We found your sister." The little girl stared silently toward the rain outside for several moments before tears filled her eyes for the first time since the investigation began. Then she whispered the sentence that made Bennett realize the nightmare was still far from over. If Grace escaped, the child said softly, then he'll come for me himself now. The hospital transformed into a war zone after Grace was rescued from the mountain cabin because federal authorities finally understood they were no longer protecting merely a traumatized, unidentified child. They were guarding the only surviving witnesses capable of exposing a hidden system that may have stolen and erased children for decades across multiple states. Armed agents sealed entire floors. Snipers occupied rooftops surrounding the trauma center. Surveillance teams monitored every street for blocks in all directions. Yet despite overwhelming security, fear settled over the investigation heavier than ever before because Elias Vane remained free. Wounded, cornered, and increasingly unpredictable. Detective Laura Bennett barely left the hospital during those days. She moved constantly between Grace's guarded intensive care room and the pediatric wing where the ghost child slept beneath nightmares severe enough nurses sometimes cried hearing them through closed doors. Thunderstorms rolled across the city almost every night now, and each storm seemed to pull more memories from both sisters like ghosts surfacing through floodwater. Grace regained consciousness fully 48 hours after the rescue. The moment doctors allowed questioning, federal agents filled observation rooms expecting answers that might finally unravel the entire nightmare. But when Detective Bennett entered quietly beside trauma specialists, Grace's first words stunned everyone listening behind the glass. Did he touch her again? Bennett asked who she meant. Grace's expression tightened with panic instantly. My sister. Bennett assured her the ghost child remained safe under protection. Grace closed her eyes in visible relief before whispering something almost too soft to hear. Then we still have time. Investigators quickly realized Grace's psychological condition reflected years of extreme trauma far beyond ordinary captivity. She spoke in fragments, lost track of time frequently, sometimes referred to herself by different names unconsciously before correcting herself moments later. Yet despite the damage, certain memories remained horrifyingly sharp. The underground rooms, the storms, the children singing in darkness to remember their real names, and Elias Vane standing silently at the end of narrow hallways watching them without blinking for hours. Then Grace revealed the first truly devastating truth behind the hidden facilities. There were more places, she whispered. Silence swallowed the room immediately. Detective Bennett asked how many. Grace stared toward the hospital window where rain slid slowly down the glass. I only remember 5, she answered. Federal command erupted into emergency operations instantly afterward. Search teams reopened investigations surrounding orphanages, schools, psychiatric centers, and foster institutions connected remotely to Elias Vane or his known aliases. The scale became overwhelming almost immediately. Thousands of vulnerable children passed through those systems across decades. How many vanished unnoticed? How many hidden chambers still existed underground? Meanwhile, Grace slowly revealed more details about the organization surrounding Vane. He was never alone. Men transported children between facilities during storms. Women posing as nurses and caretakers in forced punishments. Some children disappeared after transfers. Others were renamed repeatedly until they stopped remembering who they had been before. The goal, according to Grace, was not simply abuse. It was erasure. They wanted children nobody would look for. She whispered one evening while staring blankly toward the ceiling. Runaways, foster kids, orphans. They said forgotten children were easiest to rewrite. Detective Bennett felt sick hearing the sentence because suddenly the entire pattern behind the case became horrifyingly clear. The hidden network survived for decades precisely because society already failed the children. targeted most. Then Grace revealed something even worse. Elias Vane believed memory itself caused suffering. He taught followers that identities could be broken down and rebuilt through fear, isolation, and repetition. Storms became part of the conditioning because thunder drowned screams while creating emotional triggers linked to obedience. Grace described children forced underground during rainstorms for hours while names were repeated and erased over cassette recordings. By the end, she whispered, some kids forgot they ever had families. The nation reacted with fury and horror once fragments of Grace's testimony leaked publicly. News stations compared the hidden facilities to institutional torture sites. Protests erupted outside government buildings, demanding accountability for agencies ignoring abuse. Allegations connected to St. Margaret's and other institutions years earlier. Survivors of childhood trauma flooded support hotlines nationwide, sharing stories once dismissed as fantasy or delusion. Yet amid the growing outrage, investigators focused increasingly on one terrifying question. Where was Elias Vane going now? Grace believed he would not flee permanently. He never leaves unfinished things behind, she warned. Then she described another detail that froze the task force instantly. Vane kept records, extensive records, names, photographs, psychological observations, transfer histories. A master archive documenting decades of stolen children and hidden facilities. Detective Bennett asked where the archive was kept. Grace hesitated visibly before answering. Under the first place. Nobody understood immediately what she meant until Grace described a location from her earliest memories. A massive underground structure beneath an abandoned religious property somewhere north near water. And cliffs. Bells ringing during storms. Long tunnels beneath stone foundations. Detectives recognized the pattern instantly. Another institution. Possibly the origin point connecting all later facilities. But before Grace could provide further details, the hospital suffered another security breach that nearly destroyed the investigation completely. At 2:06 a.m. during a violent thunderstorm, alarms triggered suddenly across the trauma wing after someone cut external power lines behind the building. Backup systems activated instantly. But for nearly 30 seconds, entire corridors plunged into darkness. Federal agents rushed toward Grace's room immediately. They found one guard unconscious beside the doorway, blood pooling beneath his head. Inside the room, the window stood shattered open toward rain and lightning outside. Grace was gone. Panic detonated through the hospital. Armed teams flooded stairwells and rooftops while helicopters launched despite severe weather conditions. Security footage revealed only fragments through glitching storm interference, a dark figure. Entering the trauma wing moments before the blackout, wearing hospital scrubs beneath a black raincoat. Then cameras caught Grace herself moving through corridors barefoot beside the figure almost willingly. Expression blank and distant like someone hypnotized. Detective Bennett felt cold terror settle through her body watching the footage because Grace did not appear kidnapped. She looked conditioned, responding automatically to something deeply buried in her mind. Then another horrifying realization surfaced. The ghost child was still inside the building. Bennett sprinted toward the pediatric wing, convinced Elias Vane intended taking both sisters together. But when agents burst into the room, they found the child awake and sitting calmly beside the rain-covered window, holding her eyeless doll. A cassette tape rested neatly on the blanket beside her. Bennett grabbed it immediately while demanding whether anyone entered the room. The little girl nodded slowly. Grace came, she whispered. She said she had to go back underground before he hurts more children. Silence swallowed the room. Then the child looked directly at Bennett with tears filling her eyes. She told me the real place is under the sea. Federal analysts played the cassette tape moments later inside a secured operations room. Rain crashed loudly through the recording. Then Grace's exhausted voice emerged shakily beneath the static. "Laura, don't follow us until morning." Bennett clenched her fists immediately because she already knew authorities would ignore the warning. But Grace continued before anyone could speak. "He still has children there." The room froze. "I saw them," Grace whispered through tears. "Some are so young, they don't even remember daylight anymore." Detectives exchanged horrified looks instantly. Active victims. Living children still trapped somewhere underground decades after the first disappearances. Then another voice entered the tape suddenly. "Come, male." Elias Vane. "You wanted the truth," he said softly. "Now come see what your world allowed to happen." Coordinates followed. Coastal Nova Scotia. Near abandoned monastery ruins overlooking the Atlantic cliffs. Tactical teams mobilized before the tape even ended. Military aircraft prepared for cross-border operations alongside Canadian authorities while storms battered the coastline through the night. Investigators understood the stakes immediately. The original facility, the archive, potentially surviving children still hidden underground, and Elias Vane waiting there deliberately. But before helicopters departed, Detective Bennett returned briefly to the ghost child's room one last time. The little girl sat staring toward rainwater sliding down the glass. Bennett asked quietly whether Grace would survive. The child hugged the eyeless doll tighter against her chest before answering with a sentence that haunted Bennett all the way toward the Atlantic coastline. "Grace stopped being afraid a long time ago," she whispered. "That's why he could never erase her." The helicopters crossed into Nova Scotia beneath black storm clouds thick enough to swallow entire sections of coastline from view. And every person aboard understood they were flying toward the center of something far older and more terrifying than a single serial predator hiding children underground. Detective Laura Bennett sat near the open side door listening to rotor blades cut through violet rain while federal agents reviewed satellite images of the abandoned monastery ruins Elias Vane, referenced on the cassette tape. The property stood isolated above the Atlantic cliffs, nearly 40 miles from the nearest populated town. Officially, the monastery closed in 1968 after structural collapse and declining religious attendance. But investigators already knew official records meant almost nothing anymore. Every institution connected to Vane hid another layer beneath it. Underground rooms erased names. Forgotten children. The ghost child's words echoed relentlessly inside Bennett's mind during the flight. The real place is under the sea. By the time the helicopters reached the cliffs shortly before dawn, the storm had transformed the coastline into something almost unreal. Massive waves exploded against jagged black rocks below, while lightning illuminated the monastery. Ruins in violent flashes across the horizon. The structure itself looked enormous even in decay. Stone towers half collapsed toward the ocean. Stained glass shattered long ago, sections swallowed by ivy and salt corrosion. Yet thermal scans revealed heat signatures beneath the foundations. Multiple signatures, some moving. Federal command immediately authorized tactical entry. Agents descended through freezing rain while sniper teams secured the perimeter overlooking the cliffs. The main monastery appeared abandoned at first glance. But investigators quickly discovered fresh footprints tracking through flooded hallways toward the lower crypt level beneath the chapel. Grace had been right. The underground entrance waited hidden behind a stone altar collapsed decades earlier. Massive steel doors reinforced the tunnel beyond, newer than the monastery itself. Industrial. Deliberate. Someone invested heavily in keeping the underground structure concealed and operational long after the monastery above died. Agents breached carefully. The air beneath the cliffs felt suffocating instantly. Damp concrete. Rushed. Salt water. Long corridors stretched beneath flickering emergency lights, powered somehow despite the facilities. Supposed abandonment. Then came the sound investigators would later describe as unforgettable. Children singing softly somewhere deep below the ocean cliffs. Tactical teams advanced rapidly through branching tunnels while stormwater dripped constantly from overhead pipes. The underground complex dwarfed every previous site connected to Elias Vane. Dormitories, medical rooms, observation chambers behind one-way glass. Storage areas packed with thousands of cassette tapes and paper records. Some sections appeared abandoned for years. Others remained active. Food still warm. Beds recently used. Then agents reached the first holding room. 3 children huddled together beneath blankets inside a locked chamber no larger than a prison. Cell. 2 boys. 1 girl. None appeared older than 10. The moment federal officers opened the door, the children began screaming in terror and covering their ears as though expecting punishment. One little boy reportedly begged agents not to change his name again. Rescue teams flooded the underground complex immediately, while medics triaged survivors suffering severe malnutrition, psychological trauma, and signs of prolonged confinement. More children surfaced deeper inside the tunnels. Some remembered fragments of original names. Others responded only to numbers. Detectives felt horror mounting with every room uncovered because the facility was not merely historic evidence of old crimes. It remained operational until days earlier. Then came the archive. Hidden behind reinforced doors near the lowest tunnel level beneath crashing ocean water, investigators discovered rows upon rows of filing cabinets, photographs, recordings, psychiatric evaluations, transfer records, and coded ledgers spanning nearly 4 decades. Thousands of children documented systematically. Some marked released, others transferred, many labeled simply unrecoverable. The scale overwhelmed everyone present. Entire lives erased quietly beneath the world's notice. But amid the chaos of rescuing survivors and securing evidence, one question consumed Detective Bennett above all others. Where were Grace and Elias Vane? Search teams pushed deeper through flooded maintenance corridors leading toward natural sea caves. Beneath the monastery foundations, lightning shook the cliffs overhead, while ocean water surged through lower tunnels dangerously fast. Finally, agents discovered signs of recent movement. Blood smears along walls, discarded syringes. Footprints disappearing toward an old elevator shaft, descending even farther underground. Bennett joined the pursuit herself despite federal objections, because instinct told her the nightmare would end below. The elevator no longer functioned, forcing teams downward through rusted ladders while waves thundered somewhere beneath them. At the bottom waited another chamber unlike anything investigators had seen yet. Circular. Concrete walls stained black by decades of seawater and mold. Observation windows overlooking individual cells arranged like spokes around the room. Some empty, others containing children curled beneath blankets in silence. And at the center stood Elias Vane beside Grace. The moment flashlight beams found him, the room seemed to freeze completely. Tall, thin, gray-haired now, but unmistakable. Black raincoat hanging soaked around his frame. Eyes hollow beneath harsh emergency lighting. One hand rested calmly against Grace's shoulder, while the other held a pistol loosely at his side. Grace looked exhausted beyond words. Blood staining her clothing from a mountain cabin escaped days earlier. Yet despite everything, she stared directly toward Detective Bennett without fear. Elias Vane smiled faintly when agents surrounded the chamber. "You took your time," he said softly. Nobody moved. Tactical rifles remained fixed on his chest, while waves crashed violently through tunnels below. Bennett demanded he release Grace and surrender. Vane tilted his head, slightly, almost amused. Surrender to what? He asked. The same world that forgot these children before I ever found them. The statement sent visible anger through agents around the room. But Grace interrupted weakly before anyone responded. Don't listen to him, she whispered. He wants a story to sound noble. Vane's expression darkened immediately. Bennett stepped closer, carefully, while negotiators attempted stabilizing the situation. Then Elias Vane began speaking again. Not like a cornered criminal, but like a man finally prepared to explain himself after decades hidden beneath institutions and storms. He described abandoned children cycling endlessly through foster systems, shelters, psychiatric wards, abusive homes. Forgotten lives, invisible lives. Nobody searched for them until graves appeared, he said quietly. That's the real crime. Bennett answered coldly that he murdered and erased innocent children. Vane looked almost disappointed by the accusation. No, he whispered. The world erased them first. Then he gestured slowly toward the surrounding cells. I only built a place where forgotten things stayed hidden. Grace suddenly pulled away from him hard enough to nearly collapse. Tears filled her eyes as she faced Bennett directly. The archive, she said urgently. Burn it before anyone else uses it. Vane's calm expression cracked for the first time. You still don't understand, he snapped suddenly. Those records matter. Grace shook violently, but continued anyway. Their instructions. Silence swallowed the chamber. Detective Bennett realized instantly what she meant. The files documented methods, conditioning techniques, psychological manipulation. Identity erasure systems refined over decades. If the archive survived publicly, others could replicate the nightmare. Vane noticed the realization spreading across agents' faces immediately. Then something inside him seemed to collapse. He looked toward the children watching silently through observation windows around the chamber. Toward Grace trembling beside him. Toward floodwater rising slowly across the floor beneath the tunnels. Finally, he laughed softly to himself. You think ending me changes anything? He asked. There are always more forgotten children. Then, without warning, he shoved Grace violently toward Detective Bennett and fired once into overhead. Electrical panels. Darkness exploded across the chamber instantly. Gunshots erupted. Children screamed. Ocean water roared through tunnels as emergency systems failed. Tactical teams lunged through blackness while Bennett dragged Grace behind collapsed equipment, searching desperately for Vane. Then came the sound of metal doors slamming somewhere deeper underground, followed by alarms. Screaming throughout the complex. Flood warnings. Entire lower sections began filling rapidly with seawater after the damaged systems collapsed. Chaos swallowed the facility. Agents evacuated children upward, while rescue teams fought rising floodwaters, consuming corridors. Room by room, Bennett and several officers pursued Vane through collapsing tunnels beneath flashing emergency lights until finally reaching the lowest sea cave beneath the monastery cliffs. Rain and ocean spray blasted inward through the cavern opening while waves crashed violently against. Rocks below. Elias Vane stood near the edge, holding a flare that painted the cave blood red beneath the storm. Detective Bennett aimed her weapon steadily while demanding surrender again. Vane looked strangely peaceful now, tired, ancient. Do you know why storms mattered? He asked softly over the crashing waves. Bennett said nothing. Vane stared toward the black Atlantic beyond the cave mouth. Because nobody hears children screaming during storms. Then he stepped backward off the cliff into darkness below before anyone could reach him. Searchlights swept the raging ocean for hours afterward. No body surfaced, no trace recovered. Just black water crashing endlessly beneath the ruined monastery while dawn slowly broke across the horizon above the largest child recovery operation in modern history. By the time dawn finally rose over the Atlantic cliffs, The monastery no longer looked like an abandoned ruin hiding secrets beneath the sea. It looked like the aftermath of a war. Emergency floodlights illuminated helicopters landing endlessly across muddy fields while ambulances carried rescued children away from the underground tunnels one after another. Federal agents moved through the storm-soaked complex, collecting evidence as ocean water continued, flooding lower chambers where Elias Vane disappeared into darkness hours earlier. News helicopters circled overhead beyond police barricades, broadcasting live images that stunned the world. Children wrapped in blankets, emerging from hidden underground cells beneath a monastery no one had entered in decades. Survivors unable to remember their own last names. Boxes of photographs documenting vanished lives across half a century. The investigation that began beside Highway 41 with one silent child now exposed something far larger and more horrifying than anyone imagined. Detective Laura Bennett sat beside Grace inside a temporary medical unit established near the cliffs. While rain battered the canvas walls outside, Grace looked exhausted beyond words, pale from years of abuse and fresh injuries suffered during the rescue. Yet something about her expression had changed since the underground confrontation. For the first time since investigators found her inside the mountain cabin, she no longer looked hunted. She looked empty, like someone who survived too long inside darkness and finally reached the end of fear. Bennett asked quietly whether she believed Elias Vane died in the ocean below. Grace stared toward the distant waves for several seconds before answering. He spent his whole life underground, she whispered. He wouldn't choose drowning. Search teams continued combing the coastline anyway despite brutal conditions. Divers explored Sea Cave beneath the monastery, while helicopters scanned miles of shoreline for bodies or debris. Nothing surfaced. No blood. No remains. No trace of Elias Vane anywhere beyond the flare burning briefly against the storm before he vanished into black water. Federal command privately acknowledged what investigators already suspected. He may have escaped again. Yet even amid the uncertainty surrounding Vane's fate, the scale of evidence recovered beneath the monastery began reshaping the entire investigation hour by hour. Thousands of documents filled the archive chambers. Transfer logs connecting children moved secretly between institutions across multiple states and provinces. Audio recordings detailing conditioning methods. Photographs spanning decades. Names investigators had searched for unsuccessfully their entire careers. Some children documented in the files officially never existed according to public records. Others have been reported missing so long ago, surviving relatives already died without answers. The nation reacted with collective horror once the first verified details reached media outlets. Headlines described the underground monastery as America's hidden graveyard of forgotten children. Vigils formed in cities worldwide. Former foster children and abuse survivors flooded social networks with stories eerily similar to St. Margaret's methods. Politicians demanded sweeping reforms across child welfare systems while federal agencies launched emergency investigations into dozens of connected institutions named inside the archive. Yet the emotional center of the story remained the sisters who survived. The ghost child and Grace became symbols of endurance against something almost impossible to comprehend. But privately, investigators feared the younger sister still remembered far more than she revealed. The child had not yet been brought to the monastery due to security concerns, remaining under heavy guard inside the hospital hundreds of miles away. Then, during forensic review of the archive, analysts discovered a sealed cassette labeled only with one word written carefully in black ink. Highway. Detective Bennett insisted on hearing it personally. The recording began with heavy rain striking metal surfaces somewhere underground. Then came Grace's voice, much younger than recent tapes, but older than childhood. "Please," she whispered shakily. "She's too little." Elias Vane answered calmly nearby. "She forgets easier than you do." Grace began crying openly after that. "Take me instead." Silence followed several seconds before another sound emerged beneath the static. Tiny footsteps. A little girl sobbing softly. The ghost child. Then Grace whispered the sentence that explained the mystery haunting investigators since the beginning. "If you let her go, she'll never remember this place." Vane responded quietly. "That depends on whether you stay obedient." Detective Bennett reportedly felt physically ill listening to the tape because finally the truth surrounding Highway 41 became clear. Elias Vane deliberately abandoned the younger sister beside the road years earlier, not out of mercy, but as psychological punishment directed toward Grace. One sister freed conditionally, while the other remained trapped underground for decades afterward. The revelation devastated everyone involved in the investigation. Grace sacrificed her entire life so her younger sister could survive outside the hidden system. Yet despite everything, she never stopped trying to leave clues behind. Songs, recordings, names scratched into concrete walls, all pointing back toward the child she saved. Then another disturbing discovery surfaced from the archive. Several documents referenced continuation sites, still active beyond the monastery network.